There has been a lot of confusion recently about what is causing all of these fish kills in Southwest Florida. Some people are saying it's the sugar farms that are feeding pesticides into the waters of Lake Okeechobee, which are then being dumped into the Gulf of Mexico. Some people are saying it's the mass amount of chemicals we are using to keep our lawns green, which are being required by homeowners associations. Some people are saying it's the red tide, which people often mistake for the toxic algae from Lake Okeechobee. Others are saying it's a combination of some or all of these factors. So I'm going to try to seek out some answers. Many people are trying to pinpoint this on one thing, but I truly think the problem is a combination of all of these issues. I'm not going to dive too deep into the toxic algae of Lake Okeechobee because others have done an incredible job researching and putting together videos on it. Some of those will be linked below. The general consensus of those videos is that the algae that is being dumped into the ocean is having a negative effect on marine life. That being said, is it the only? I was able to have a sit-down conversation with Lauren Gattery, an intern at Mote Marine in Sarasota, Florida, who is on the phytoplankton ecology team. She is also helping conduct the research that Mote is doing with red tide. The first question I asked her was simply, what is red tide?
Red tide is actually a species of dinoflagellate known as Carenia brevis. The common name of red tide is that in scientific terms. It's the dinoflagellate that causes blooms, and it causes people to cough and sneeze and have that irritant. It also is responsible for a lot of fish kills that happen in the Gulf.
Then I asked Lauren, where does red tide come from?
There's actually no scientific evidence that proves exactly where red tide comes from. There could be various different reasons of things as to what it comes from, such as eutrophication, which is pollution or pesticides. It could come from maybe excess rainfall. We just have no correlation as to what actually causes a bloom to start. It's just a natural phenomenon. It's a natural disaster, kind of like a hurricane. There's really no way to kind of say what exactly is the main cause of it, unfortunately, right now.
The cleanup efforts in Sarasota are in full effect. The machines they use to pick up trash when people leave them on the beach double as a great way to pick up dead fish. After speaking briefly with one of the drivers, I learned that they take these fish that they collected from the beaches and bring them to the Sarasota landfill. Although there is no current scientific evidence to support this, Mote is researching if the red tide that killed the fish can be transferred to other animals that later eat animals killed by it, which can cause an issue with any animals that may eat the fish from the landfill. What is the correlation with red tide and the toxic green algae that is being pumped into the Gulf of Mexico from Lake Okeechobee?
There's actually no scientific evidence that proves that there is a correlation between Lake Okeechobee and the Gulf of Mexico's red tide. There are some kind of key factors in both. Lake Okeechobee is obviously a body of fresh water, and the green algae that people have been talking about actually are known as cyanobacteria, and they can only thrive in freshwater conditions. If they were introduced into a saltwater environment such as the Gulf of Mexico, they would not thrive or be able to survive because the salinity is too high of an environment. We definitely need more research and more information in order to say that those two are correlated. I can see why people are frustrated because eutrophication can lead to algae growth, but again, we don't have any proof that that's what's fueling the red tide species out in the Gulf of Mexico.
My final question for Lauren was, what is Mote doing to research red tide specifically?
What Mote is doing now is we are doing the best that we can. We're doing a lot of monitoring. We do coastal samples. We also do shelf samples. And with that, we are able to monitor where red tide is in the area so we can let the general public know. That way, if people do have asthma or any related disease that may happen because of being exposed to red tide, we can let them know. Also, Moat is doing various experiments to see if there's a way to decrease the longevity of a bloom. Some of these would include like ozonation is one of the techniques that Moat uses when we have red tide near the sea turtle hospital, and we're looking to make that large scale, and hopefully they can find some leeway with that. Moat also is looking at, they've built these dock systems, and we kind of set them off the course of the water at New Pass and Bay Dock near Moat, and we're trying to grow these filter feeders on the docks, and then we're hoping to expose them to red tide and see if they're able to filter out the red tide at a fast enough rate in order to decrease the longevity of the bloom. Hopefully with these experiments, among future experiments, we're able to figure out how to beat this complex species. Moat scientists and FWC scientists are really working together, and honestly, there's not a way to stop it. It's a natural disaster, like a hurricane. All we can do is monitor it and continue to research it. Just continue to fund research for red tide to figure out what it is that we can do.
Unfortunately, we don't know enough about red tide to be able to answer all of the questions that everybody has. I think the biggest question that people still have is, what can we do to help prevent these things from happening in the future?